and welcome to the Jersey Machine. Today we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most obscure but powerful forces in New Jersey government, joint insurance funds, or JIFs. These are entities that can financially shield political machines from accountability when the government is sued for discrimination or violating people's rights, or when a public official hurts someone. In one case, we found a councilman who got free lawyers to fight a sexual harassment lawsuit that had nothing to do with his role as a councilman. And for years, here in Middlesex County, one JIF has been hiding millions in deficits and rewarding insiders. That is, until a financial collapse so severe that the state had to step in. It's a story about secrecy, mismanagement, and a hot mic recording that they never intended for us to hear until they accidentally sent it to me.
Ship is going down and he's like, wow, COVID's on the rise.
But to understand how we got here, we have to start in an unlikely place. At the intersection of routes 18 and 1 in New Brunswick, where a proposal was put forth for a New York Yankees-themed sports bar with a name that the mayor of New Brunswick just couldn't stomach: Buck Faustin's Roadhouse.
So, what was Buck Faustin's Roadhouse?
So Buck Faustin's Roadhouse was just an idea for a bar that would cater to fans of the New York Yankees. This gentleman named Larry Blatterfine went to our mayor, Jim Cahill, and said, I got good news, I want to open another bar in New Brunswick. I'll take the old Bennigan's and turn it into, the Yankee-themed sports bar, and we'll call it Buck Faustin's Roadhouse. Mayor Cahill supposedly told Larry, great idea, we'd love to have you do that. You just can't have that name.
What was wrong with the name?
The name was apparently a spoonerism, which is a term for when you switch the first letters of a couple of words and say something similar, but okay, not the same. So, right. Yeah, the Yankees' big rival, Boston. So the name supposedly was too unacceptable for the mayor. This was a bar proposed for a place not too far from where he lives, where a lot of the people in the political machine live, the Rutgers Village neighborhood, the entrance to it. And there were other reasons to oppose this project. It was going to be a pretty big bar, and it's basically no way to get there but driving. Right. So it would have been more of a drinking kind of place than Bennigan's was.
Right, and that intersection, by the way, is hazardous at the best of times.
Yeah, where Route 18 meets Route 1 is just kind of a crazy intersection to begin with, and then there's this little island in the middle with, until recently, the abandoned Bennigan's. Larry wanted it to be Buck Faustin's Roadhouse. Mayor Cahill, in a sticking point over the name, basically said, we're not going to let you do that. The police actually held up the approval of the liquor license being transferred for this establishment, and when it ultimately came down to city council to approve it, they voted against approving putting the liquor license at this site. And Larry Blatterfine was very upset about this, so he went ahead and actually got a lawyer, filed a federal lawsuit against the city of New Brunswick, claiming that they were violating his First Amendment rights to name the business what he wanted to. Unlike most times that people sue the government, this case actually went all the way to a trial. The jury spent 2 more days deliberating, and they ultimately said, we think that this man's rights were violated, and we order that he be paid about $1.5 million. And ultimately, the city agreed to just pay $1.4 million and not appeal it. When I first heard this and I started reading about it in the press, I said, wow, that's a big hit to our budget, $1.4 million. But what stood out to me was Mayor Cahill's comments to the Home News Tribune.
What did he say?
So first of all, he said, quote, in today's world, it shouldn't be a surprise that elected officials often aren't believed, particularly by people who don't know you. But we have insurance coverage for these things.
That's
and I thought, wow, yeah, what kind of insurance policy is that?
And what kind of things?
Violate people's rights and then lose the case, but you have insurance that pays your bills. Right. I was very curious, well, what insurance company is that? And ultimately learned that it's actually a government entity in our case, called the Middlesex County Municipal Joint Insurance Fund.
A GIF. So what is a GIF?
GIFs are government entities that are basically provide insurance, but they're exempt from New Jersey's insurance code. So they're not private corporations, they are governments. And they started to become a thing in the 80s. So New Brunswick was one of the founding members of the MCM GIF. It started in 1986. And yeah, they cover claims against local governments for everything from a person who slips and falls and hurts themselves to very serious matters like excessive force, police killings,
wow.
and even, child abuse.
Wow. So Mayor Cahill had said in his statement when he was talking about the Buck Fostons case and the settlement, he said, the settlement will be paid by insurance rather than taxpayer money. But is that actually accurate?
So in this case, he's trying to make the people reading this article think that it's this magic money that comes from somewhere else. Some insurance company is paying it. But in reality, it's not a company. It is the government. And they get all their money from the member municipalities that pay millions in premiums. So it is taxpayer money. The fund is made up of taxpayer money. But here he is telling the press it's paid by insurance rather than taxpayer money.
Very misleading. So when this GIF started, there were 8 towns that were part of it.
Right. But yeah, when I started covering the GIF, it had more than 24 members,
wow.
I think 25 or more.
Wow. So when it first started, it was supposed to be about pooling risk, but as time went by, it became a shield for corruption.
Yeah, not only was it helping political machines get away with their wrongdoing, but they also got a lot of legal work to dole out, to decide which cases to fight, how hard to fight them, which lawyers to hire.
And a lot of the lawyers they hired were the machine-connected lawyers.
Exactly. So many of the politically connected lawyers would sort of be a part of this system by getting chosen by a GIF to be eligible to get that kind of work.
And some of them are pretty prominent politicians in New Jersey as well.
Yeah, so like for instance, the GIF that we are now in, the Central Jersey GIF, their top attorney is State Senator Bob Smith. He took over for the prior mayor of New Brunswick, John Lynch Jr., as our state senator.
The guy who was the cousin of our current mayor.
The convicted felon cousin of our current mayor, yes.
There's also the firm of Speaker Craig Coughlin, who is involved in a lot of these cases as well.
Yeah, so Speaker Craig Coughlin, when he became speaker, he created this law firm that has turned into a juggernaut, making millions in taxpayer money, representing towns. And yes, they also get a lot of this GIF work around the state.
And getting back to Mayor Jim Cahill here in New Brunswick, he's collecting a $99,000 annual pension while still in office. And he's been the mayor since 1991. Until recently, the salary was just $40,000 a year. But he went and got himself a job as the top attorney for the Middlesex County Joint Health Insurance Fund, a insurance fund that deals with employee health care, similarly named. And because pensions are based on an employee's highest earning years, their 3 highest earning years, he topped out at like $134,000 for this insurance fund job, and so that's why he's getting almost $100,000 on top of his mayor's salary.
So we obviously talked about New Brunswick's notorious police department, and you mentioned a couple of court cases where black officers were suing their bosses. How does that fit in with the GIF?
Yeah, great question. So we had 2 really big cases filed around the same time in 2012. Lieutenant Stephen Middleton, I think he was a sergeant at the time, but he accused the people who run the police department of racism and discriminating against him because he is black. And yeah, the case actually went to a trial, or started a trial at least, in 2017. And by that time, taxpayers had spent more than $2 million fighting that case and another brought by other black officers who were saying that they were being disfavored or getting unfavorable assignments or unfair treatment because they weren't supporting the mayor politically. They weren't, buying tickets to his fundraisers and things like that. The Middleton case actually got settled for a $175,000 payment to him in the middle of the trial. And yeah, because the GIF was involved, it wasn't just New Brunswick taxpayers that were paying for this. The punitive damages claims were paid for by New Brunswick and approved by the city council, like you might expect for this kind of case. But compensatory damage claims, which the JIF took on, that was more than 1.6 million of the 2 million when I first wrote about it. So basically towns in other counties and far away that had nothing to do with New Brunswick except being in the same joint insurance fund were actually chipping in for this corruption and discrimination case. These two cases added up to more than $2 million. And I thought it was very interesting because I figured most of these other towns probably have no idea. In fact, sometimes even the local officials don't know.
Absolutely. And when we've looked at that list of the things that have been covered by the JIF, New Brunswick features pretty heavily there. Meanwhile, among all the dozens of towns that were part of the JIF at that time, some of them are just these tiny little places, but they're still responsible for New Brunswick's wrongdoing. Yeah,
and it's not even just towns, but like rescue squads or parking authorities, boards of education.
They all can become part of the JIF.
They are eligible to join, and in many cases did join our JIF. So yeah, there's some heavy hitters, some big towns, some big agencies, but also a lot of tiny towns that through their premiums are having to pay out big payments to fight some of these New Brunswick cases that came up.
Absolutely. And they also don't have the control in some of these cases that New Brunswick did. For example, there were sort of mixed signals about whose decision it was to settle the case and make that big payout.
In the Middleton case, there was some of this sort of like distancing of the very decision to end the case by writing a 6-figure check to this guy who accused you of racism. The lawyer handling the trial for the defendants, which included Mayor Cahill and Police Director Tony Caputo, gave mixed signals. You know, he said initially Cahill didn't approve it. But then he said he approved it, but he did say on the record, Mayor Cahill wanted a jury to decide the case, and Director Caputo felt exactly the same way. So they sort of get to play it both ways and say, like, well, I'm not going to have to testify, but, you know, I wish we could have gone all the way and fought this to the end.
Shame that we didn't, though.
Yeah, like, oh, nuts, you know. The JIF made us settle it is basically what the implication is there. So when obviously they were consulting pretty closely with Mayor Cahill.
And then it acts as a convenient shield that they can put the responsibility onto.
Yeah, oh man, we wish we had our full day in court. We wish we got the jury to weigh in, but the JIF made us just write a huge check to this guy.
Wow. So there were a number of other cases that you've looked into involving the JIF. One of them involved Helmetta.
Helmetta is the tiniest town in Middlesex County, but in 2014 there was a pretty big controversy over this new animal shelter they had created, and the Helmetta Animal Shelter was kind of mismanaged. It seemed like it was family members or, you know, nepotism involved in the operation. And
whose family members were they?
So the mayor at the time was Nancy Martin. She had family members that were involved in this, and it wasn't being run the way animal advocates wanted it to be. So there was a lot of controversy after the Ronco family got a dog through this shelter, and then it got sick and died pretty quickly, and so they wanted to investigate, started showing up and taking pictures, recording.
They were taking pictures of just what was going on at the shelter?
Yeah, trying to document what was going on and file things like a public records request to get information about how it was being run. And yeah, they had a run-in with a special police officer at the public municipal building for Helmetta. I think they came there to record and file an Oprah request maybe, but they were pretty quickly confronted by law enforcement. There was a special police officer. He had been a career police officer in Piscataway, but after retiring came back to work for Helmetta in this sort of low-key kind of role with an hourly paycheck. And he on camera made the stunning remark that, you know, because he believed then President Barack Obama had, quote, decimated the friggin' Constitution, that he, as a Helmetta special police officer, no longer had to follow the Constitution. Wow. So he sort of dismissed Steve Ronco's constitutional argument for his right to be in the building and to do his recording. Him and the police director escorted Steve and his daughter out of the building, and it was all captured on camera, and then they slammed the door behind them, and that went viral and, ended Richard Racine's career as a special police officer.
Under New Jersey law, with the alarming and all that, I don't fall under alarm because I'm in a public building recording, which is my first and second.
You know what? I
Amendment
really don't
rights.
even care about that because Obama has decimated the freaking Constitution. So I don't give a damn because if he doesn't follow the Constitution, we don't have to.
It's New Jersey case law.
Yes,
You don't have. Did you get that?
Yeah, did
He
you
doesn't
get
have
that?
to follow the
Because
Constitution.
our president
That's
decimate our Constitution,
that's
then
the
we
main-
don't have to.
That's the law of the land. You have to follow it, whether what he does or not.
Then you tell him that.
Wow. So when Steve Bronco was kicked out of the building, he went to court.
Yeah, and in fact, it was more than just one case. The mayor was apparently really gunning for them, trying to get the police to arrest them for cursing and things like that. And I think Colleen Ronco did some time in jail in this whole saga. But, at the end of the day, all this kind of got wrapped into a big federal court case that the Roncos brought against Helmeta.
And they didn't just sue Helmeta, they sued a number of people.
Well, they sued Richard Racine, they sued the police director as well. I'd have to look to see all the defendants, but because it was, Helmeta was part of the fund, Helmeta for these alleged constitutional violations, that was something that the JIF had to handle the claim and decide how to cover it and how much to fight it. It certainly led to lawyers making some money and the JIF having to take that out of everybody's pool.
And then around that same time period, back in 2014, that's when you began attending the board of the JIF meeting. And there was a certain case going on at that time that was very notorious.
Yeah, so this was a pretty major moment in New Brunswick where our fire director was driving a city SUV and he ran over 3 kids in a crosswalk.
Wow, let's roll it back a little bit. Tell us about the fire director, Robert Rawls.
Robert Rawls has an interesting story. Mayor Cahill made Robert Rawls the director, and he was the director from, I want to say 2006, until quite recently. He just left. But despite his good qualities, he was not a good driver, and he had a actually terrible driving record that many people believe would have been much worse had he not been a high-ranking public safety official, because a lot of times he would get into a crash or an accident and wouldn't face the same consequences that you or I might face if we were the drivers.
How many did he actually have on his record?
I lost track, but it's over 20 now.
Oh, crashes?
20 accidents.
Wow.
Maybe not all his fault, but
Okay.
definitely there was a pattern. It was a above average amount of accidents. He also had tickets and suspensions on his record too. And yeah, this sort of, one incident at one crosswalk kind of sparked a huge interest in this, what I would say became a scandal. In May of 2014, Director Rawls crashed his SUV into 3 kids that were on their way home from school. And the kids were in a crosswalk. It was on Livingston Avenue by the Redshaw School. When that happened, there were massive protests.
We want justice! We want justice! We want justice! We want justice!
And yeah, the kids survived, but they were
horribly injured.
They were injured. They did have broken bones, and they did sue the city eventually in a case that would ultimately be handled by the JIF and was settled for a rather large amount. I want to say $700,000 or $800,000 between the 2 different cases that came out of that one crash.
And the kids needed that much money for their recovery.
They were certainly awarded it. I know that the families were really devastated by this, and as a young kid, it can be really hard to have to go through things like that. We investigated at New Brunswick today. We ended up suing Middlesex County to get the records from this investigation into the crash because they didn't want to provide them. Ultimately, Director Rawls wasn't intoxicated or didn't have anything in his system that showed up on the tests that were done.
And to this day, we still don't know the reason why he gets in so many crashes. It wasn't alcohol, at least in this case.
Right. And I didn't think it was, but he does have a very bad driving record, and he's driving a big vehicle. It's an SUV. So there have been other instances where folks have narrowly avoided being hit by him, or Rutgers employees were hit by him in the past, and it never came out or didn't make a big splash like this incident with the 3 kids did. But after the incident, people started reaching out to me and telling me stories, and I was looking into it and finding out that He even had a criminal record during his early years on the fire department where he, was accused of shoplifting and assaulting the security guard that confronted him.
Wow. But after the situation where he ran down the children, he temporarily had his driving privilege taken away.
Right. So after this, he pretty apparently took a little time off, and when he came back, he had fire department employees driving him around. He was not allowed to drive because the city said you can't drive city vehicles anymore. And then in 2017, they decided to let him drive again, and they got him a brand new big SUV. And I was sitting down with my colleague Carlos Ramirez for a meal at the restaurant across from the firehouse, and we see Robert Rawls parking his big SUV, and it's got a dent in it. We did look into it, did confirm he had a small accident with the vehicle. And then in recent times, he got in a couple more crashes, and those ultimately the one that once again ended his ability to drive city vehicles was a crash in North Brunswick where he was driving the deputy chief's vehicle because his director's vehicle was already in the shop for a recent crash. So in this case, the other driver pressed charges against him for careless driving or reckless driving, and he ultimately had to, like with that initial incident with the kids in the crosswalk, he did end up paying a small fine and pleading guilty to a motor vehicle offense.
And that was a unique situation because of the other driver who he happened to hit.
Yes, a woman named Ellen Nita. She's an insurance agent for many years and very experienced with how crashes are handled by New Jersey police. And she told me she was shocked that, given the facts of this crash and what happened to her in her car, and she had her daughter in the car, that she was really shocked and disappointed that he did not get a summons from the police.
So what did she do?
Well, in New Jersey, you're allowed to make your own complaints of violations of the law in this regard to the municipal court, and so she exercised her right to bring her own complaint, and that's why Robert Rawls faced some small consequences for this final crash of a city vehicle. Meanwhile, the city was on the hook for the repairs to the vehicle, and ultimately, I don't believe Ellen Nita filed a claim or suit, but obviously, her insurance probably did.
But at least as a result, he's off the roads for now.
I would be surprised if he is able to get private insurance to be able to drive. He's now retired. He's no longer working for the city. So I don't know if he needs to drive or does drive or if he's able to get insurance, but I would imagine it's extremely expensive given his record, which explains why he kind of relied upon the city vehicle and being able to get insured through the MCM JIF, which provides auto insurance to the city.
So even though the JIF seems to freely make payouts in these cases, the JIF is required by law to get excess coverage for larger claims over a certain amount, which is like in the millions.
Yeah, sometimes they call that reinsurance, or, it's like extra insurance on top of the basic insurance. They needed a new provider, and they looked where a lot of JIFs go for this. The MEL JIF, that's the Municipal Excess Liability Joint Insurance Fund, which is actually a JIF made up of JIFs, specifically to provide excess coverage, which means like if a case exceeds a certain amount, like goes into the millions of dollars, then that's when this excess coverage would kick in to help keep things stable within the fund itself.
And what they didn't realize at that time was that attempting to get coverage from the MEL JIF was going to be the start of their downfall.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, because the MEL JIF has high standards. They know what they're doing.
They're not run by machine members.
Right. They are not connected politically to the Middlesex machine. They are insurance professionals, and while they may not be perfect, they definitely know a lot about how JIFs are supposed to work. And when the MCM JIF applied to join the MEL, they started to get some pushback because their financials were not in good shape.
What was wrong with them?
So they were not tracking all the things they should, and because of that, they were thinking they were in good financial shape when actually they had a huge deficit. So they were more or less ignoring a category called IB&R. That's incurred but not reported. It basically means like claims that you might be on the hook for but hasn't been reported to you yet. You might not know about them.
Okay, so it's like something has been done to someone, they may be able to bring a case, but they haven't done that yet.
Right. And you kind of have to account for that in your numbers, because some of those things do come to pass sometimes years and years later. One example is with child sex abuse. New Jersey passed a law that reopened people's ability to bring those kinds of cases, in some cases decades after the incidents occurred. So organizations that had child sex abuse going on all of a sudden faced a new insurance issue. And yeah, the MCM-GIF, they were just ignoring that whole category in their financials. And as it turned out, when the dust settled, they were actually like $27 million in the hole.
So who was running the Middlesex County GIF?
In the case of the MCM-GIF, they hire GRMA, which is a firm that is run by the Kurtz family. And they basically exist to run the MCM-GIF.
So this firm is made up of the Kurtz brothers and then their father.
Their father was with the firm, and he's the one who took the blame for not including the IB&R, and there were some very tense board meetings on Zoom where they kind of reckoned with this as part of their efforts to join the MEL-GIF. In the end, they were able to join the MEL-GIF, but the MEL-GIF decided not to keep them after just 1 year, and they had to find other coverage again. And this is when sort of the people started looking for the exits. So
right. So one of the demands made by the MEL-GIF was that they submit to state oversight.
They basically had to submit to the Department of Banking and Insurance,
wow,
taking much more of a role than they had before, and sort of like coming clean about all these shortfalls and problems. And then, like I said, folks started looking for the exit. The longtime attorney, who's a big political guy, Ed Testino, he left. William Kurtz, the sort of patriarch of the family who ran the firm, he left. You had towns, a lot of the towns in the fund started finding other funds to join, and
that was accelerated by another thing that the MEL-GIF demanded that they do, which was bill the towns retroactively. What was that all about?
Well, yeah, I think it was really the state that made them go back to former and current members and do what's called a special assessment. Special assessment is where you go to a prior year and you sort of redo the math and you say, well, actually, it turns out we thought we were at this point, but actually this year for this line of coverage, we actually lost more money than we thought. So here's a bill.
Wow.
From, in some cases, as far back as like 2001.
And how big were these retroactive bills?
In some cases, they were millions of dollars. So you have, depending on how long you were in the fund and what your premiums were, what your sort of share of the risk was, they would be going back to towns. In some cases, these towns had left the fund 10 years ago or more, and they would send them a bill, and by now there's a different mayor and a different council. They might have never heard of the MCM-GIF,
and the towns have
but they're getting a bill for a huge amount of money for insurance that they thought they already had paid for. And so that's what happened with dozens of towns and authorities, boards of education, rescue squads that all got these bills. And, the special assessment process also gives them a chance to speak up and be part of a public hearing on it. Normally a public hearing, you expect residents, members of the public to be speaking up. But in this case, it was almost all government officials speaking out, calling out the GIF for their mismanagement and corruption.
Hi, this is Melissa Perlstein from the Borough of Metuchen, and I know Metuchen no longer has a vote, but I am adamantly opposed to this resolution today. We have not been provided with the information. I cannot understand, and I'm speaking for my residents now, that they would be obligated to pay something on assessments that were 20 years ago. This is absolutely unconscionable to me. And there were supposed to be professionals. Yes, the Borough of Metuchen, who was ever sitting in my seat when they were a commissioner and part of the fund, had a fiduciary responsibility. But where were the auditors and where were the actuaries to rectify this issue that has been let go for 20 years? This is just unbelievable.
But ultimately, the remaining members of the GIF said their hands were tied. They said, we need to get this money back. We're in a deficit. The state's making us hit you up, and that's what they've told us to do, so we're going to hit you up for the money. Cough it up. But as you could imagine, these town governments that are already tight on funds don't want to just write a big check. So we saw that while New Brunswick went along with it, most of the towns were, especially the ones that had already left, were not going to pay this.
Okay, so this was the scene. This is the early 2020s. The Mel GIF has audited the Middlesex County GIF, discovered serious financial problems. It was a wake-up call. They had to submit to state oversight. They're billing the towns retroactively. The towns are revolting. The machine players are sort of like scurrying off the sinking ship because they can see the writing on the wall. Behind the scenes, the GIF is starting to collapse. And then the case of Councilman Glenn Fleming comes in.
The GIF deals with so many dozens and hundreds of cases over the years, I can't keep up with them all, but one that I just had to keep an eye on was when I heard Glenn Fleming, the elected councilman from New Brunswick, was accused of sexual harassment. He was accused by a woman, not his wife. He is married, but this was a woman who was also involved in politics, also involved in the Democratic Party.
What was her role?
She was an elected committee woman in Piscataway.
Okay.
And yeah, they started seeing each other at
Like
political functions. And, you know, she ultimately sued and said that he made inappropriate advances to her.
What did he do?
Allegedly exposed himself to her, and
One of the times she said that he did that was at the Brownstone in Metuchen.
I think in the parking lot there, yes.
So he said, like, oh, come see something in my car or what? And
I wasn't there, of course, but I definitely know that the complaint alleged in a car in Metuchen that he made an unwanted exposure. But the case was bigger than that because she also alleged that after she started raising concerns about him, red flags, talking to other people in the party, saying that, can you help me? I've been victimized by Glenn Fleming, that she no longer got the grant writing work that she had been getting, and she was, she felt like she was ostracized by some of these folks. So she sued a whole mess of people, not just Glenn Fleming, and she did do this in Superior Court, and I honestly, again, just can't keep up with everything that's going on, so I didn't write about this case right away. It was filed in 2020. It was covered by at least one media outlet at the time, but the moment that I said we have to sound the alarm about this is when I learned that his lawyer bills were being paid through the MCM GIF.
wow.
Even though the case had nothing to do with his service as a city councilman or his role in government.
Sort of
These
like
incidents,
extra
she didn't work for the city. These incidents didn't happen on government property. This was a sexual harassment case against someone who happened to be a councilman, but it really wasn't touching upon his power as a councilman.
It didn't take place in the city hall.
It really was a stretch for the city to pay his legal bills. I thought that was inappropriate, frankly, because, he should pay his own legal bills for his own personal problems. Yeah. And, when I heard that the GIF was covering those legal bills, that really, especially knowing what a shitty financial situation the GIF was in.
You were already aware.
I was saying,
right?
wow, this is, corrupt. They're paying something they shouldn't be paying when money is tight, and it's for a political person. It's sort of just made the point very, very clearly that something's wrong here. Even the judge in the case was surprised when he learned. That's how I learned, is the judge asked on the record, has the city indemnified Mr. Fleming? Is he going to be, are his bills being paid by the city? And the answer was, yeah, it's, basically through the GIF, he's getting these bills covered. Now, after my article, the GIF put a stop to it. They said, we'll do $10,000 more and nothing else after that.
What had they paid to that point?
It was about $35,000 they
Wow.
had already paid for Fleming's legal defense. But after I brought to their attention this situation where the judge was pushing back on it, the judge thought it was weird, then they said, okay, well, they had a closed session, and they said, okay, from now on, we're going to do $10,000 more, and you got to find your own attorney if you want to keep fighting it.
Just a little $10,000. between
Just
friends.
another 10K.
And Glenn Fleming himself said some pretty strange things during the case.
He has a way of saying strange things. I've known him for a long time. We started as, basically opponents in politics.
He compared himself to human sacrifice. He compared himself to George Floyd.
Yeah, this case sort of made it into the news right around the time that George Floyd was murdered by Minneapolis police, and Glenn Fleming chose to compare himself to George Floyd because he felt that it was all part of the same kind of discrimination against black people. Mind you, the person who accused him of sexual harassment is a black woman. So it was a little bit disingenuous in my view. And also, he talked a big game about wanting his day in court. And, I'm going to fight this and you're going to see I'm right. This is made up. But that's not how it went.
He changed his tune when he learned he was not going to continue to be funded by the JIF.
Exactly. So the case sort of had to, it was, a moment where it had to either move forward or be settled because he no longer had the free lawyer. And so on the day that the trial was supposed to start, he supposedly agreed to settle it for $15,000, to just pay $15,000 to the plaintiff and resolve the case, dismiss it. Documents were signed. Fleming's lawyer signed for him. He was not there. But then later on, he would go on to say that he actually didn't agree to settle it, and he wanted to fight it, and he was essentially like sour grapes over his attorney and thought that it was not handled properly. But, by the way, only after the plaintiff started pushing to get paid and saying, hey, you got to pay me, and you haven't paid me yet. And eventually a judge had to order that Fleming would have to pay the $15K.
And this he would have to pay himself. The JIF was not paying it.
Correct. He had expended all the JIF funds. But yeah, it was just a really ugly situation because the JIF had basically taken on a case that they should have never had anything to do with. Now, as this was playing out, Councilman Fleming was actually up for re-election to another term. I thought it was a good idea to track down our mayor, Jim Cahill, and ask him if he was going to be supporting Councilman Fleming for re-election.
So whether I support or don't support someone is none of your business, and it's not what I would talk to you about, but I'd be happy to tell the public how I feel about it.
And when will you be doing that? How can the
I
public
do it every day.
How can the public find out if you support Glenn Fleming?
Not through you.
Okay, do you think that he should pay back the taxpayer funds that were used for his legal defense?
There were not taxpayer funds used for his legal defense.
Where does the JIF get its money?
It gets it from the communities that are part of the JIF.
New Brunswick being
Charlie,
one, and the taxpayers.
Good talking
pay.
to you, Charlie. Have a great rest of the evening.
So this case sealed the deal that no other towns were going to join the JIF, but then things actually got a lot worse for them.
Yeah, so the Middlesex County Utilities Authority, they do run sewer service for, it's actually 36 towns, even bigger than just Middlesex.
And they were a member of the JIF.
And they also run the landfill.
Okay.
And they joined the JIF after a pretty shocking case of their own. They had been sued and ended up, for some reason or another, the insurance carrier they had wouldn't cover it, and the case ended up being settled for $5 million, and the bills were $7 million.
What was that?
This was a case of SpectraServe versus MCUA, which was a big case. They basically were accusing the MCUA of steering contracts to politically connected or family member run businesses. And SpectraServe was a company that was trying to get business, and they said, you passed over us, or we're favoring this other company, R3M, and it was, allegedly, due to pay to play, where they were making political donations, and that's why you gave them the business and not us. And the case actually did make it to a trial. There were lots of lawyers there because the insurance company was fighting having to pay it because they said that the County Utilities Authority had not been entitled to their coverage because they were in the wrong here. And, the end result was a $5 million settlement paid to SpectraServe. So that, all told, it was at least $12 million that the MCUA ratepayers ended up having to pay. Everybody, when you flush your toilet, that's the sound of the MCUA getting, paying their lawyer bills with your money. And that's sort of what was going on before they joined the MCM JIF. So then, they switched to the MCM JIF, and they ended up really playing a key role in taking it down.
How did that happen in 2023?
Yeah, so they have sued the JIF now a couple times over these special assessments, right? They were getting hit up for, compared to some towns, it wasn't that much. But the MCUA is also a big agency, right? They're doing big things with heavy machinery, and things can go wrong. Natural disasters, for instance. Hurricane Sandy flooded out some of their pump stations. And so it is one of the bigger, more risky entities that you might have in a joint insurance fund. And so they also have, lawyers that were ready to fight against these back bills that they were getting from these years that were sort of like mismanaged by the JIF. And they pushed back, and the JIF started like withholding claims payments, and there was like a lot of bad vibes, bad blood between these two entities. And the JIF, I think ultimately the MCUA cases made it so that the JIF had to shut down in 2024 because they thought they had resolved the issue, and then the MCUA sued them again in December 2024. And by the end of the month, the JIF was trying to, basically abandon ship and leave.
Okay, so before all that happened, the JIF was doing its meetings on Zoom, and they were recording the meetings, and you wanted to get those recordings.
Yeah, so the JIF meetings used to be in-person, literally catered affairs, where back when in the good old days, they'd have a lot of people there, they'd get catered lunch for everyone, and usually nobody from the public would show up except maybe me. As we entered the pandemic, they switched to Zoom meetings, and they recorded the Zoom meetings. You can tell when you're in a Zoom meeting, it's being recorded. You got that little light up there. So New Brunswick Today would try to record and broadcast as many as we could, and I obviously was participating quite a bit, as I could tell there was a lot going on, but I didn't make it to every meeting. I didn't record every meeting, so I wanted to make sure I had all the recordings from this year. In fact, there was a meeting I think I had missed, and so I wanted to just request all the meetings from 2024 so far. And I made that request and only finally got it honored 5 months after I filed it, I think. It was the type of thing I had to remind them like 10 times to just send me the recordings. I requested them. I have a right to them. Send them to me. And yeah, so I finally got them.
And there was something that they sent you as part of that recording that they were not supposed to send.
Yeah, they basically, after one of the Zoom meetings, the board meeting that's open to the public, the two people most responsible for the day-to-day operations of the agency, Glenn Kurtz and Barbara Murphy, who was sort of the fixer they brought in when everything went nuts. They brought in her to kind of clean things up or turn things around, and then the two of them recorded themselves speaking negatively about some of the people they work with, but also like scheming to try to get the board of the JIF to stop answering my questions.
They also mocked their own lawyer.
They did. They really, were, obviously not thinking they were being recorded or that anyone was ever going to listen to this. And they were speaking very freely about not only the people they work with, but also the financial state of the agency, right. The JIF itself. They joked about how the ship was going down. I think what they were saying was the gentleman they have there who's in charge of safety and doing things like trainings and making sure the towns are doing things right. He was talking about there's been a rise in COVID, so that's something we're telling our towns about, or just something minor during the meeting. And so they, at least what I took away from it, was they were joking about how, he has no idea how bad things really are. The whole ship is sinking. Wow. This rise in COVID is nothing compared to the fact that we are on the verge of bankruptcy. Something they had not disclosed publicly, and in fact continuously pushed back on when I would ask about those kinds of things. And, hey, $27 million deficit's pretty bad. How are you going to come back from that? They would assure me that, no, things are fine. We're not talking about anything that's, we're going to keep going, was sort of the attitude they had. But then in private, the two of them are joking about the ships going down and saying we can't even do a dissolution legally because they don't have enough cash to do it. So it sounded very alarming, some of the things they were saying in this
laughing in
recording.
this hilarious way about all of it.
They certainly didn't give the perception that they were stoic or serious about this work, but that it was just a big laugh.
So not only were they deliberately hiding the scale of the crisis from everyone, they also thought it was kind of funny. So let's go ahead and play some parts of that hot mic recording and your confrontation with the GIF meeting about it.
You know, I do have to address the GIF's leaders sent me a recording of Ms. Murphy and Mr. Kurtz speaking rather freely, overwhelmingly about GIF business. And I certainly didn't appreciate the way I was discussed in that call, but setting that aside, there was some more concerning stuff in that recording. And I'd like you to elaborate, if you can, on what you meant when you said things like, quote, the ship is going down.
Ship is going down, and he's like, well, COVID's on the rise. Well, again, you're not kidding.
You also discussed fund dissolution and said, quote, we can't do that. We're missing the cash. We're doing what's called bankruptcy. If we get to that point, in all seriousness, it's a bankruptcy. And that stuff sounds like really serious fund business.
Responded to my email, and I thought it was funny when I said plan a dissolution. We can't do that now.
No, you don't have time for that either.
No, we're missing the cash. If you read the regs, you've got to have cash. We're doing what's called bankruptcy. If we get to that point, in all seriousness, it's a bankruptcy. And we're not paying pennies on the dollar because we don't have pennies.
You don't have pennies anymore.
And I'd like to understand what the context of those comments was. Can you tell me any more about the possibility of fund dissolution and or bankruptcy for the GIF?
I believe that Mr. Cradaville had sent an email, I believe I was copied on, where he may have asked some of these questions. And in my recollection, the GIF provided a written response to Mr. Cradaville. Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd be curious if Mr. Cradaville did see that response.
I did receive a response from Mr. Jaffe. It was woefully deficient and really misleading. It said that, it was disappointing that I posted the conversation on YouTube. It referred to it as a pointless stunt. But my point is that the statement did not address in any way fund dissolution, bankruptcy, or the comments that were essentially complaining about me and saying that you, quote, constantly answer the dude.
We shouldn't be answering questions.
We constantly answer the dude.
Yeah.
So I think we need to just write these numbers down. I think we need to get an understanding of, you know what, if they want to do that, that's fine. But be careful what you wish for.
Mm-hmm.
And accused me of spreading BS.
So a couple of days ago, Charlie, you're telling me you weren't on the site today? That's bullshit.
I don't think that was an appropriate or fair response to the content of that call.
Charlie, your time is up. And I actually gave you 3 minutes, but I appreciate your comments, okay?
I'd appreciate a response. Thank you.
All right. So I believe that we stand by the response that you received in writing, so there would be no further discussion in this section of public comment.
Okay, so after all of this, things came to a head, and on New Year's Eve was the meltdown.
Yeah, so they had given no indication, at least nothing I picked up on, that they were going to make any major changes. They had a meeting in mid-December. Our city council had a meeting December 30th, I believe, and they didn't bring anything up there.
And this was all 2024.
This is all, the end of 2024. But then on December 31st, they scheduled a emergency meeting, a meeting that they did not provide the normal notice for.
And it was unrecorded.
And for the first time, they chose not to record their meeting. I wonder if it has to do with the disclosure of their hot mic recording, or maybe they knew what they were going to discuss on December 31st was going to be pretty damning.
Right.
And so on this call that was not recorded and I was not there to witness, they passed 3 resolutions basically closing up shop, saying that all the members, that they couldn't meet the needs of the 5 members, so the members were free to go somewhere else for their insurance for 2025, which starts in less than a day, and that they were going to allow for the JIF to make loans to these members and also agree to continue to pay certain vendors into the next year, where they were going to have to continue to at least administer all the hundreds of claims that they have been responsible for over these years. And so this all happened on December 31st without any real public notice or oversight. I don't even think they told the state, which was overseeing them.
Right, which is all completely illegal.
And yes, indeed, I sued to try to overturn it, but it really didn't matter because the state Department of Banking and Insurance smacked them down and said all 3 of those resolutions are null and void. You cannot abandon a fund like this. The law is very clear that you must have a dissolution plan. And if you remember back in the hot mic recording, they're saying they can't do a dissolution. They don't have the cash. So they basically were in a situation where they knew they couldn't do the thing they legally had to do, so they just cooked up another scheme to get out from under it and try to, see if they would get away with that. And so the parking authority, the city of New Brunswick, and the 3 other entities that were still left in this JIF, with the other 3 being South River, Carteret, and Millstone Borough, those 5 were, the ones that were left, and ultimately Millstone kind of went a different direction and ended up in one JIF, but all the others ended up in the Central Jersey JIF as of 2025. But they didn't get to fully abandon the old JIF like they wanted to. The state made them start having meetings again, made them come up with a dissolution plan. And so basically New Brunswick and our parking authority are in 2 JIFs. The one that, was a house of cards that fell apart in 2024, right? And the one that we just joined, the Central Jersey JIF.
And the Middlesex County JIF is still hitting up those towns for the old money, and the towns are still objecting to the notion that they're going to have to pay for it. And so they tried to take a new strategy and begin suing towns for the money that they're trying to collect. The first municipality they chose to sue was Millstone Township, which was a former member of the JIF.
So Millstone Township is in Monmouth County. They were part of the JIF until 2018, so they left before all the problems sort of became apparent. But they were sent a bill for that special assessment of about $287,000, and when they didn't pay it, the MCM JIF decided, well, we're going to take you to court and try to make you pay it. And so they initiated litigation over this special assessment.
But Millstone Township didn't take that lying down.
They actually countersued and
for fraud.
They accused the MCM JIF of fraud and said basically this is on you that you didn't bill us because you were promising us that we had the insurance coverage, but you were not administering your fund properly. And you were violating all sorts of laws, so we're not going to pay you to fix your problems after, this many years.
So what's the status of the JIF these days?
Yeah, so both the case with Millstone and MCUA are on hold, but they are active. They are, going to have some conclusion. We don't know what that is yet. Right now, the JIF is in the process of approving a dissolution plan. So that is the sort of document that would need the state's blessing to say how they're going to dissolve and what will come of all this. At the end of the day, it's still going to be fought over in court. There's going to be a lot of lawyers fighting over this for years to come, and it remains to be seen, what role the state is going to play. It seems like they kind of only recently have been pushing back on all this nonsense, but you can bet we'll continue to follow it.
And that we'll all continue to be the ones paying for it.
So that's where the story of the Middlesex County Municipal JIF ends for now. The ship's going down, towns are fighting back, and the state government is only finally now waking up to a crisis that's been hiding in plain sight for years. And no matter what happens in court, the fallout from this is going to land on the same people, the general public. Now, in our next episode, we'll explore how the rise of car culture and New Brunswick's redevelopment machine catapulted one of the Middlesex GIF's members, New Brunswick Parking Authority, into becoming one of the most dominant but least scrutinized centers of power in the city. We'll trace how the NBPA became the largest public parking authority in New Jersey, and how it survived despite multiple theft scandals and a failed multi-million-dollar commercial real estate venture. Plus, we'll tell you how the machine uses the parking authority to extract wealth from the New Brunswick community and hand over some of the most valuable real estate here to big developers. All that and more next time on The Jersey Machine.